From the Opopco Studios in Oklahoma City, this is a Hudiburg Fantasy Football Update. You can go to Hudiburg.com and buy your next new car during the NFL games. Mike, we've got some lists to go through this week. Fantasy owners think about not fool's gold, but Foles gold.
These kind of players drive you nuts because you start the wrong wide receiver. You start the wrong running back. Oh, I knew you should have started him instead of someone. Now Foles is going to be your backup quarterback. If he's on your waiver wire, definitely go pick him up. He's worth picking up. But whether to start him week in, week out, the opponent will be a factor. But guess what? He had 7 touchdowns, all-time record. The Dallas Cowboys have one of the worst defenses in the league, one of the worst in NFL history, held him to 3 points and 80 yards passing, and guys were wide open, he couldn't hit him. Maybe he's blossoming, maybe he's the kind of guy, but he's one of those guys that obviously he has some upside, but can he be consistent? Because in fantasy football, you don't want a 4 or 5 point week one week, 50 the next. He's one of those guys that right now you just don't know.
He's not the only one, though, that goes on the Foles gold list.
No, Riley Cooper, his wide receiver, the rookie who got in trouble for the using the wrong words with a teammate early in the season. He's been getting a little better. He's getting a few more targets from Foles now in the offense. He had 2 touchdowns yesterday, but he's the same way. I don't think I would start him, but he's a guy with some upside. You might get lucky. He had 2 TDs yesterday, a monster game. By the way, all those Oakland Raiders secondary guys, they were falling down. So these were easy touchdowns that you normally don't get, so that was part of it too. But obviously, both those guys had monster games. Now going forward, you got to really make tough calls. Right now, I would sit them.
All right, what about quarterback pickups? That Nick Foles guy appears on this list too, doesn't he?
Well, if he's available, you got to go get him. Just after 7 touchdowns, everybody will be wanting him. But there's a couple other names out there that I think are about as good. One of them is Case Keenum, who's beaten out Matt Schaub in Houston. It's obvious. Last night with Andre Johnson, they hooked up 3 times. He had a great game. If you got still a bye week guy coming up, there's a handful left. You can pick him up and use him. There's even another guy, Jason Campbell, the guy that played Whedon in Cleveland. He's been playing well. So if you're really desperate for a backup for a bye week or injury insurance, or your other guy's not playing well and he's up and down, these are guys you could go get, at least watch and maybe start some weeks.
Well, you mentioned buys, and we sort of passed the heavy buys, but there's still some teams left with some buys.
Yeah, there's still 8 weeks left. This week is the Chiefs, which have Jamal Charles in the defense. And then you go on the next week, there's a couple more really standout players that you'll miss. But the one secret, I think, sometimes on bye weeks that people don't realize, when you're this deep into 24 of the 32 teams have had their bye. If you've got a good tight end like Gronkowski or the Saints guy that's just a monster, or, you know, Cameron on the Browns or somebody, just go with him the rest of the season if you need a roster spot. Hope they don't get injured, and then you can always go to the waiver wire and pick up somebody that get hurt. The same thing with the kicker. If your kicker's already had a bye, you don't have to worry about kicking the rest of your go only one kicker. The risky one that some people do is one quarterback. You've got a Rodgers or a Breeze, or go down the list of the 7 or 8 guys that are just going to be in your lineup every week. You're risking they may, get hurt. But if they don't get hurt, and most of these guys are pretty durable for the most part, go with one quarterback and use that roster spot to go get somebody else that might end up helping you.
Well, you mentioned injuries. Your segues are unbelievable today, Mike. You mentioned injuries. The hospital ward's got a few guys in it this week.
There's some tough calls this week. Number 1 is Arian Foster. He's one of the top backs in the league. He thought he might play Sunday night, did not play. Watch him. If he doesn't, Ben Tate, who played with 3 broken ribs and had another guy backing him up, played pretty well with 3 broken ribs. Those 2 guys will be tough calls this week. Ben Tate, Arian Foster. If Foster's back, start Foster. If he's not back, start Tate. So that's the hospital ward for them. Darren Sproles evidently suffered an injury early in the game yesterday, may even be concussion related. You know how those drag out, sometimes yes, sometimes no. They play the Cowboys. If he's in the lineup, you definitely want to play him against that Cowboy defense. But if he's hurt and he's not playing, you got to monitor that closely. And then Roddy White has been hurt all year long. Almost activated him this Sunday. He practiced a little bit Friday, but at the last second they said no. He's one of those guys, if you're desperate, he might be ready this week.
Now, you mentioned Nick Foles and his up and down season for fantasy owners, but you've got a guy that has his own category. You've got to be kidding me.
You've got to be kidding me. The guy, I got to look at his name here. Young had 2 career carries. His whole life, he's behind Morris, he's behind Halu, he's behind all these guys, the Redskins. They get down the 1-yard line and smashes it in. Wow, that was interesting. He does it 2 more times. 5 carries yesterday, like 7 yards, but 3 touchdowns. Are you kidding me? I don't think I could anyway recommend picking him up. He might have a 0 carry game, 0 points. He may have a 1 carry game, 1 yard, or he might have some goal line carries. That's just putting a lot of faith that the Redskins drives will always stop at the 1. He's going to get the ball and go in. But it was one of those, you play fantasy football long enough, We're in week 9 now. This isn't week 2, and the guy gets 3 touchdowns out of nowhere. It's definitely, are you kidding me?
All right, thanks, Mike. Be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.